Billionaire CEO was about to lose everything until a single-dad janitor changed her life in minutes. The city below was a river of light, Chicago at midnight glowing with ambition and secrets. From the 40th floor of the Aurelius Tower, the world looked orderly, impressive, untouchable. But inside, something was unraveling. Charlotte Vance stood alone in her glass-walled office, a fortress in the sky. The room was sleek, modern, cold, even with spotless marble floors and a silent digital assistant blinking on the edge of her desk. She didn't notice the skyline tonight. Her eyes were locked on 3 monitors filled with numbers graphs and legal briefings. At 6 a.m., she would sign a merger worth $10 billion, one of the largest in the financial tech world in the past decade. It was a deal that could cement her legacy or destroy everything she'd built. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, not bothering to sit. She hadn't left the building in 36 hours. She hadn't eaten in 12. Her tailored navy suit still looked flawless, but her heels sat abandoned by the door. Barefoot and breathless, she moved between screens like a conductor in an orchestra only she could hear. Then a soft ping. One monitor blinked red. She froze. Unauthorized access detected. Another ping. Then a cascade. Root directory compromised. File pathway corrupted. Banknode 3 disconnected. No, she whispered. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Red alerts bloomed like blood on snow. One by one, secure files began disappearing. Accounts flagged for deletion. Trace routes spiraled into blind IP loops. She slammed the desk phone. Get it. Now. Full team. Emergency protocol, Alpha Red. But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. Moments later, her top security engineers rushed in breathless jackets half on. Their faces went pale as they stared at the screens. "This isn't ransomware," one muttered. "It's a vapor attack. The files aren't encrypted. They're being erased, bit by bit, gone without trace. We can't trace the source. It's bouncing across decentralized nodes, masking with deepfake meta ID. We've never seen this method before." Charlotte's voice cut like a knife. "Can you stop it, Silence? Then we need more time." She stared at the blinking red light. In 3 hours, she was expected to present secure numbers to shareholders, government regulators, and 3 international boards. A single compromise and the deal would implode. Her company's value would crater by morning. "No," she said. "Time is the one thing we don't have." She waved her hand toward the door. "Out, all of you. Let me think." They hesitated, then obeyed. The door shut with a soft click, sealing her in a glass coffin of pressure. She sank into her chair chest, rising and falling, fingers trembling above the keyboard. She wasn't used to losing control. Not here, not in her tower. Then, a sound. Soft, rhythmic, familiar. Whir, clunk, whir. A janitor's cart. Outside the glass walls, a man pushed a gray bucket down the hallway, mop handle tucked under one arm, earbuds in. He moved slowly, methodically. Just another night for maintenance. Another floor to polish. Charlotte barely noticed until he paused in front of her office. He glanced through the glass. She looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. Jack Mulligan. His uniform was faded, hands calloused. A fresh water stain darkened the hem of his shirt, but behind those tired eyes was something alert, focused, almost sharp. Jack's gaze dropped to her screen. He saw the red, the scrolling code, the panic. He looked away quickly and kept moving, but his pace slowed. Charlotte turned back to her keyboard, hands flying, but nothing worked. The breach was accelerating. Then a knock. Soft, hesitant. She turned. Jack stood just outside the glass door, mop in hand. For a long second, neither moved. Then she opened the door. "Do you need something?" she asked, guarded. Jack nodded toward the monitors. "You've got a cascading node failure in your outbound financials. Looks like someone's tunneling through your sandbox architecture." She blinked. Excuse me. He shifted his weight. I used to work in systems architecture. Security, mostly. She narrowed her eyes. You're a janitor. He didn't flinch. Now, yeah, but I know that kind of breach. If you give it another 10 minutes. He pointed toward the screens. You won't just lose a few files. You'll lose your entire company. Charlotte's mind raced. Was this a bluff? A trick? Or something else? She stared at him. Really stared. The creases around his eyes weren't just from fatigue. They were from long nights, sleepless years, maybe even regret. He looked like a man who had nothing left to prove, and nothing left to lose. She stepped aside. Come in, she said quietly. Jack entered the lion's den with no fanfare. He set his mop against the wall and leaned over the console. The room seemed to shrink around him. He studied the code like reading an old language. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. You sure about this? She asked. No, he said. But I'm the only one who sees what's coming next. Then, with a few strokes, he opened a terminal window and whispered under his breath as if greeting an old enemy. Charlotte watched breath caught in her throat. And for the first time in hours. The red stopped spreading. The clock kept ticking. The skyline still shimmered. But inside the 40th floor of Aurelius Tower something had shifted. This wasn't just a breach. This was a war. And she had just let in her only hope. The hum of the servers filled the room, a low, steady heartbeat beneath the chaos. Jack's fingers danced across the keyboard, calm but precise as lines of code flickered like lightning on the screens. The air was thick with the faint smell of burnt dust and static. Charlotte stood behind him, arms folded, trying to decide whether she'd just saved her company or invited disaster in a janitor's uniform. Jack muttered something under his breath, tapping a few final keys before leaning back. There, he said softly. You've stopped the bleed. Charlotte stepped forward. Stopped. Meaning, it's over. He shook his head. No. Meaning, it's paused. Whoever's in your system, they're smart. Smarter than your team realized. They didn't just break in. They built a tunnel. If you want to stop them for good, I'll need full access. Her eyes narrowed. Full access to Aurelius's entire network. Are you out of your mind? He turned toward her. You asked me what I know about security, he said quietly. I know this: once a hacker gets administrative privileges, you can't fight from the outside. You fight from the core. Charlotte took a step closer. Do you even understand what you're asking? That's master credentials. Root authority. If I hand that over and you're not who you say you are, then you'll lose everything anyway, he said, cutting her off. In about 8 minutes. The room went still. The only sound was the soft ticking of the antique clock on her shelf. Charlotte had always trusted systems, not people. But right now, every system she'd built was betraying her. She studied him, the mop handle leaning against the glass wall, his cheap watch the roughness of his knuckles. And behind all that, a composure she recognized the steadiness of someone who'd already survived his own collapse. She hesitated, then pulled a security token from her desk drawer, a small obsidian chip glowing with faint blue light. If you're lying, she said, this chip has a tracker. You won't make it to the elevator. Jack took it gently, nodded once, and turned toward the console. Fair enough. They descended into the basement where the real heartbeat of Aurelius lived. The server room stretched like a steel cathedral, rows upon rows of black towers blinking in the dim light, the air cold enough to bite. Charlotte stood a few feet behind her heels, clicking softly against the metal floor. You talk like someone who's done this before, she said. I have, Jack answered, crouching beside the primary node. A long time ago. What happened? He didn't look at her. I got tired of fighting ghosts. Sometimes you spend so long trying to protect other people's worlds that you forget your own is falling apart. Charlotte frowned. There was weight in his voice, the kind born from something deeply personal. But before she could ask more, his screen flashed a violent burst of red code. "They're still inside," he muttered. "Adaptive malware, almost like it's learning from me." "Can you stop it?" Jack didn't answer. He was already typing faster now. The lights flickered overhead as the servers whirred louder, pushing against their limits. Sweat gathered at his temple. His lips moved, whispering fragments of commands, lines of logic, old instincts he hadn't used in years. Charlotte watched entranced. The janitor she'd seen pushing a mop a few hours ago was gone. This man was different, focused, relentless, almost dangerous. Then, suddenly, the red blinked out. The monitors steadied. Jack exhaled long and low. Okay, they're out of the main system. For now. Charlotte released a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "That's it," he shook his head. "No, it's never it. Look." He pulled up a secondary display log file, scrolling endlessly. "See this pattern? The breach came from your internal VPN. Not from outside. Someone opened the door for them." Her heart stopped. "You're saying it's an inside job?" Jack turned toward her, his expression grim. "I'm saying someone in this building gave them the keys." Charlotte stood silent for a moment, the hum of the servers echoing like a pulse in her ears. She wanted to dismiss it to find a simpler explanation, but deep down she knew it made too much sense. The attack hadn't been random. It had been surgical. "Do you know who she asked?" "Not yet," Jack said, "but I can find out if you let me dig." Her instinct screamed no. Giving him access once was already reckless, but the alternative, trusting her own board, her own IT, felt worse. She studied his face again, the quiet confidence there. Not arrogance, just certainty born from experience. "Who are you, Jack Mulligan?" she asked. He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "A guy who used to fix problems like this. Before I became one." Her gaze softened just for a second. There was pain behind his words, but also something else, integrity. The kind that couldn't be faked. He packed up his small toolkit, ready to leave, but she stopped him. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "At least, not tonight." "I've got a son at home," he replied quietly. "I promised him breakfast." She blinked, surprised. "You're a father." Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah. Single dad. He thinks I clean floors for a living. Which, technically, I do. That caught her off guard, the simplicity of it. The humanity. In this glass empire built on profit margins and mergers, it sounded almost noble. Charlotte crossed her arms. "You saved a $10 billion deal tonight. Cleaning floors might not be your real job anymore." Jack met her eyes, his tone even. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just patching leaks." But, as he said it, Charlotte caught the flicker of something in his expression, conflict. Like a man standing at the edge of an old life, uncertain whether to jump back in. They returned to the 40th floor. The skyline was paler now, touched by the faint gray of approaching dawn. The city below had no idea how close it had come to witnessing a corporate collapse. Charlotte stood by the window phone, pressed to her ear, canceling a dozen meetings. Jack cleaned his hands with a rag, silent. Finally, she turned to him. "Whatever this is, it's not over. I need you to stay on call. Quietly. No one outside this room needs to know you were involved." Jack frowned. "You're not going to tell your board. They wouldn't understand. Or worse, they'd panic." He hesitated. "You're asking me to keep working off the books. I'm asking you to keep us alive," she replied. There was something in her tone, authority, yes, but also vulnerability. For a woman known in headlines as the Iron CEO, that was rare. Jack exhaled. "I'll think about it." As he turned to leave, Charlotte stopped him again. "Jack." He looked back. "You said someone on the inside opened the door," she said. "If that's true, why didn't they finish the job?" Jack stared at her for a long moment. Because they didn't expect someone to notice. He started for the elevator, his voice low as the doors slid shut. "And next time, they won't make the same mistake." When the doors closed, Charlotte stood alone once more in her glass tower. The monitors were calm now, the red lights gone. But her reflection in the glass looked different, haunted, uncertain. She turned back to her desk fingers, tracing the obsidian chip Jack had used. Something in her gut told her that Janitor wasn't who he appeared to be. She brought up the security feed from the basement. There he was, a small figure beneath the cold glow of the servers, his hands moving with purpose. Charlotte leaned closer to the screen. "Who are you, really? Jack Mulligan," she whispered. Outside, the first light of morning crept over the city, painting the glass towers gold. Inside, on the 40th floor of Aurelius, a war had begun, one fought not with guns, but with trust. And both of them knew trust was the most dangerous weapon of all. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon toast. It was small, barely 800 square feet, tucked above an aging laundromat on Chicago's west side. The kind of place where the walls remembered every winter and the floors creaked just enough to remind you were still alive. But for Jack Mulligan, it was home. He unlocked the door with quiet fingers, careful not to wake the sleeping boy curled up on the pull-out couch in the living room. A single lamp glowed softly in the corner, casting a warm halo over a cluttered bookshelf filled with robot kits, second-hand storybooks, and a photo frame turned face down. Jack moved through the apartment on muscle memory, dropped his bag, shrugged off his jacket, and for a few precious seconds stood still. The hum of the city had faded. No blinking monitors, no alarms, no glass towers, just the low rhythmic breathing of his son and the fragile peace of morning. Then a small voice cut through the silence. Dad Jack turned. Ben sat up, rubbing his eyes with the back of one hand, his brown hair a tousled mess. "Hey, buddy," Jack said softly, moving to the couch. "Did I wake you?" Ben shook his head. "Had a dream about the robot again. The one that can fly." Jack smiled. "The one with the jetpack arms." Ben nodded, eyes wide with wonder. "He saved the city." "Of course he did," Jack said, brushing the boy's hair back. "That's what good robots do." The kitchen was barely the size of a closet, but Jack moved with quiet efficiency, eggs in one pan, toast in another. He poured orange juice into a chipped glass shaped like a rocket. Ben climbed onto the counter stool, legs swinging. "Did you work all night?" the boy asked between bites. Jack hesitated. "Yeah, kinda had to." Ben frowned. "Was it a big mess?" Jack chuckled. "Biggest one yet." There was a beat of silence. Then Ben looked up, his voice quiet. "Do you ever miss your old job?" Jack froze, spatula mid-air. He forced a smile. "Sometimes. Were you really like a superhero for computers?" Jack leaned on the counter. No capes, no masks, just a lot of coffee and bad lighting. Ben nodded as if logging that away. Jack didn't tell him about the breach, or the servers, or the woman in the glass office whose voice could shake boardrooms but faltered in the dark. He didn't say how close they'd come to disaster. This was the part of the world Jack had fought to protect. The part that mattered. Later that morning, as Jack walked Ben to the nearby elementary school, the city around them felt different. Not louder, just heavier. Like it knew what he knew. That danger didn't always wear a face. Sometimes it hid behind usernames and passwords. They stopped at the school gate. "Be good," Jack said, ruffling his son's hair. "Don't forget the science fair next week," Ben reminded him with a grin. "My robot's gonna win." Jack nodded. Wouldn't miss it for the world. He watched as his son ran off into the crowd of backpacks and lunchboxes, then turned and walked back toward the L train, pulling his coat tighter against the wind. Across town, sunlight streamed through the towering windows of Charlotte Vance's penthouse. Polished floors, curated silence. A kitchen no one cooked in. She sat alone at a 12-foot marble dining table, a single cup of black coffee cooling at her elbow. The headline on her tablet read, "Aurelius Merger, Inches Forward," despite cybersecurity concerns. She didn't read the article. Instead, she stared out at the skyline, the same one Jack had vanished into hours ago. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment he stepped out of the server room, sweat-damp hair and steel in his voice telling her someone inside had betrayed her. and then he left. No demand for money, no pitch for a job, just a quiet promise to be gone before sunrise. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. In her office later that afternoon, Charlotte reviewed the logs from the breach again. Thousands of lines of code timestamps redirects vanishing trails. But one entry caught her eye. Mid-access, protocol, override, J. Mulligan. She zoomed in, cross-referenced timestamps. He hadn't just slowed the breach, he'd rewritten code in real time, lines that shouldn't even exist in her current architecture. She leaned forward, pulled up the security footage from the night before. And there he was, standing alone in the blue-lit room, eyes locked on the code like it was something personal. Charlotte narrowed her gaze. "You didn't just fix a leak," she murmured aloud. "You built a dam." She tapped her desk. "Find me everything on Jack Mulligan," she told her assistant. Quietly, and don't let legal see it. That evening, Jack returned to the apartment carrying a small paper bag and 2 packs of batteries. Ben was already on the floor, surrounded by wires, plastic gears, and one very determined expression. "The servo won't rotate," Ben announced, frustrated. I tried reversing the polarity, but Jack smiled. "Let's take a look." They worked side by side for nearly an hour. The quiet kind of time that heals things you didn't know were broken. Eventually, the robot's eyes blinked to life. Its arms rotated. A tiny beep escaped its speaker. Ben cheered, throwing his arms around his dad. "We did it." Jack laughed, the sound echoing off the walls like sunlight. "Told you we would." Then, in the quiet that followed, Jack glanced at the photo frame still face down on the shelf. He stood, walked over, and turned it over. A woman smiled back at him. Warm eyes, kind mouth. Ben's mother. She'd died 3 winters ago. Cancer. Quick, unfair. The job Jack once had, the long nights, the endless travel, the impossible hours had stolen time he never got back. So he'd walked away. From security firms, from 6-figure offers, from the man he used to be. For this. For a chance to raise a boy who still believed in robots and breakfast toast. At that same moment, Charlotte Vance stood alone in her office watching the skyline as it darkened into evening. The board would demand answers soon. Investors wanted reassurances. The merger lawyers were already circling. But her thoughts were elsewhere. She tapped open a private camera feed. Froze the frame. Jack Mulligan in the server room caught mid-keystroke. A janitor. Maybe. But not just a janitor. Not anymore. She leaned back in her chair, murmuring the question that refused to leave her mind. "Who are you, really, Jack Mulligan?" And more importantly, why did she want to find out? The next morning, Jack Mulligan walked into the Aurelius Tower with a bucket, a mop, and a knot in his stomach. The lobby was quiet, brushed in soft morning gold. Executives passed him without a glance, the same way they had every night for the past 2 years. To them, he was just background part of the building's invisible rhythm. But today, everything felt louder. The squeak of his shoes on marble, the weight of last night's silence, the look in Charlotte's eyes as she'd watched him walk away. Jack wasn't here for a shift. He was here for a reckoning. A soft chime greeted him as the private elevator opened to the executive floor. No security escort. No receptionist. Just Charlotte Vance waiting in a small conference room tucked in the corner of the 39th floor, away from cameras, away from eyes. She stood when he entered, still in her tailored black suit, but with her hair pulled back and her heels left at the door. No power games, no audience, just the 2 of them. "I thought I was getting fired," Jack said dryly. "You're not," Charlotte replied. "But I also didn't want to explain to the board why I'm having a meeting with a janitor." He smirked but said nothing. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit." Jack did. There was a pause just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then Charlotte slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single document, a non-disclosure agreement thicker than most legal thrillers, and a cover letter stamped confidential. Internal consultant proposal. Jack closed the folder without reading it. No. Charlotte blinked. You haven't even looked at it. I don't need to. His voice was quiet but firm. I'm not coming back. To security, to that life. He leaned forward slightly. I've worked too hard to disappear. You don't know what that world takes from you. I know what it gives, she countered, and right now I don't have time to build a new team. I need someone I can trust. Jack laughed not unkindly. You've known me for 48 hours. I fix a leak and suddenly I'm the company's white knight. She held his gaze. You didn't just fix a leak. You saw through a breach my entire IT department missed. You acted under pressure, and you didn't ask for a single thing in return. Jack sat back. Maybe that's the problem. You don't know what I want yet. Then tell me. There was a beat of silence. Then Jack spoke slowly. I want to go home. I want to make pancakes for my kid. I want to help him build a robot that doesn't tip over. I want quiet. Peace. He looked her in the eye. I gave everything once. I lost it all. I'm not doing it again. Charlotte didn't flinch. She understood sacrifice, the kind that hollowed you out from the inside. So she shifted gears. I wasn't always like this, she said softly. When I started Aurelius, I had a partner, Ethan Cole. We built this place from a borrowed office and a 20-page business plan. She paused. 2 years ago, he told me we needed outside capital. I said no. He did it anyway, behind my back. Jack didn't respond, but he listened. He apologized, she went on, said it was for the good of the company. But I stopped trusting people after that. Now, I only trust code, logs, systems. Systems can be hacked, Jack said. She nodded. That's why I'm talking to you. Silence stretched between them, quiet but not cold. Then Charlotte slid the folder back toward herself. All I'm asking is this, you keep eyes on our system. Quietly, no press, no job title. Just protect it. Protect us. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling window behind her. The city below was waking up bathed in a new light. And in that moment he thought of Ben laughing in the kitchen talking about flying robots and science fairs. I have conditions, Jack said finally. Charlotte nodded. Name them. No names. You don't tell your board who I am. Done. No appearances. I don't sit in on meetings. I don't give presentations. I don't answer calls. Understood. I clock in after hours, when I choose, and I don't answer to anyone but you. Charlotte considered this. What if I'm not available? Then we wait, he said. I'm not saving a company that can't wait 1 hour for a callback. She smiled just a flicker. You drive a hard bargain. Jack shrugged. I'm not negotiating. I'm protecting my son. That gave her pause. Then she extended her hand. Deal. Jack looked at it and shook. They left the room without ceremony. But as they passed the executive offices, a soft alert pinged Charlotte's phone. She checked it. A low-level anomaly in the traffic logs. Nothing urgent, but odd. Jack saw her hesitation. What is it, he asked. She handed him the phone. He frowned. That's not from last night. No, Charlotte said. It just came in. Low-volume data drift. Jack's expression darkened. It's a breadcrumb. Meaning. They're still here. Watching. Testing our reflexes. He stared at the data lips tightening. They're slowing down on purpose. So we relax. So we stop looking. Charlotte swallowed. What do you want to do? Jack's voice was calm. Measured. I want to follow the crumbs. That night, while most of the tower slept, Jack returned not with a mop, but with a plan. He moved like a shadow between the quiet hum of servers, his fingers laying down silent tripwires across the digital pathways. Charlotte stayed up watching from her private terminal, her eyes tracing the pulse of every heartbeat in the system. And together, though they didn't say it aloud, they both knew something had changed. This wasn't about cleanup anymore. This was a hunt. The city wore its night like a second skin, quiet, electric humming just beneath the surface. Inside the Aurelius Tower, the hallways were dark, polished, empty, a quiet that could make even the air feel like it was listening. Jack Mulligan moved through the silence with practiced ease. No mop tonight, no uniform, just a small black bag slung over his shoulder and eyes that didn't miss a thing. At this hour, most of the world believed the building was asleep, but Jack knew better. He'd seen ghosts like this before. Data whispers, fingerprints too faint for security software to flag, but not too faint for someone like him. The system wasn't clean. It was haunted. Down in the server core, the chill hit him like a memory. The hum of the machines felt almost human, like breath drawn deep and low. Jack stepped into the control booth and connected his setup to a hidden auxiliary port, a line no one at Aurelius even remembered existed. That was the key to staying invisible. Find the cracks no one else saw, the maintenance paths built during construction that had been forgotten once the floors were polished. Charlotte had given him access. Quiet access. But the rest, the tools, the decoys, the traps, that was all Jack. He booted up the shadow rig and whispered, "Let's see if they're still watching." Upstairs, Charlotte sat alone in her private lounge. The lights were low, the room too quiet for a woman with a mind like hers. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the table, untouched. Her laptop screen glowed with data real-time pings from Jack's activity below. She wasn't just observing. She was learning and watching him. Jack didn't know she'd turned on the secondary feed. She told herself it was for safety. But the truth, if she dared admit it, was that watching him work made her feel something she hadn't in a long time. Safe, connected, human. Back in the server room, Jack laid his trap. He spun up a decoy, an isolated mirror server labeled with a set of financial records that looked real enough to spark interest. It was pure bait, a collection of falsified trade simulations, internal memos, and one particularly tempting folder titled Merger Leverage Confidential Drafts. He encrypted it with a false firewall, something that looked hastily protected but not impenetrable. Like a wounded animal in the open. Then he activated the Watcher. A piece of code smaller than a fingernail. Silent, passive, invisible to every sweep. "Come on," he whispered. Bite. Hours passed. Nothing moved. The logs stayed quiet. Until at 2:43 a.m., a tremor. A small fluctuation. Just a few packets at first. A trickle of data pulled from the fake server routed through an internal address disguised as an outside VPN. Jack sat up straighter. He traced the path expecting a single source, but there were two. Two internal accounts. Two devices. One of them was familiar. A name he'd seen on every Aurelius press release, every corporate doc, Ethan Cole. Strategic advisor, trusted partner. The other, not so clear. Masked deeper. Careful, paranoid, but connected. Jack's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His instincts screamed at him, "Go slow. Log everything. Do not engage." He hit record, isolated the stream, marked the nodes, and whispered, "Got you." Charlotte's voice crackled over his earpiece, soft but sharp. "Jack." "What am I looking at?" he replied without turning. "Someone inside your board is siphoning data. Not just once, consistently. Scheduled to match late-night shifts, small chunks at a time. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to build something. Over time." Charlotte's voice was quiet. "You're sure?" He nodded. "One of them is Ethan Cole. The other still masked. Could be anyone with top-level access." A pause. "I trusted him," she said finally. "I know," Jack replied. "That's why he got this far." Hours later, as the sun began to rise and painted the city in soft gray gold, Jack packed up his gear. He didn't like staying in the system longer than necessary. Ghosts, after all, liked company. As he powered down the rig, he stared at the blinking logs. Somewhere, someone on the inside of Aurelius was moving carefully, patiently, And now, thanks to the trap, they were being watched. But Jack knew better than to celebrate early. This was a game of patience, and he'd just made the first real move. Upstairs, Charlotte closed her laptop. She didn't sleep that night. Her mind kept circling the same question. Why? Why would Ethan betray her? Why now? And worse, how had she missed it? The thought turned her stomach. She wasn't just angry, she was wounded, and that was the most dangerous emotion for someone in her position. She pulled up Jack's report again. The logs, the evidence, cold, precise, undeniable. But then below it all she found something else. An audio recording accidentally captured during the surveillance session. Jack's voice, not talking to her, not to anyone, just speaking aloud in the dark. She listened. Ben's gonna love this. Robot arms that rotate with servo control. Maybe even voice activation if I can find the right parts. Gotta remember to fix the sensor lag before Thursday. Charlotte leaned back, startled by the warmth that bloomed in her chest. He wasn't just a man hunting hackers. He was a father building robots with his son. A man who had walked away from a world that consumed everything, and was now quietly holding hers together. That morning, just before dawn broke fully, Jack returned home. The apartment was still except for the soft rustle of sheets as Ben stirred in the living room. Jack hung up his jacket and sat beside his son's robot kit on the floor. He gently picked up the half-assembled bot and added a new chip to the arm joint. The servo spun perfectly. He smiled. Somewhere beneath the city, secrets were shifting. Walls were cracking. Ghosts were stirring. But here in this tiny, quiet corner of the world, Jack had found something real. And that more than any system or server was worth protecting. The boardroom on the 40th floor looked more like a cathedral than a meeting space. 12 leather chairs surrounded a gleaming obsidian table. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a city built on ambition and unforgiving winters. At this hour, the light filtering in was cold and silver, throwing long shadows across the polished floors. Charlotte Vance sat at the head of the table, posture upright, hands folded tightly in front of her. On the surface, she was the same composed CEO the board had followed for years, sharp, commanding, unreadable. But inside, she was unraveling. She stared at the faces around her, familiar, powerful, polished. Among them, Ethan Cole, her co-founder, her ex-fiancé, the man she once trusted with everything. Now she wasn't even sure she could trust the air between them. Ethan sat 2 seats to her right, impeccably dressed in slate-gray fingers, steepled like a man in complete control of his narrative. His smile was practiced, warm, and utterly detached. He could charm investors in 5 languages and crush a budget in half a page. He was also, if Jack's data was right, the man siphoning the soul out of Aurelius Holdings. Charlotte had read every log, watched every line of code that traced back to Ethan's ID. She hadn't slept in 2 days, but she wasn't ready to accuse, not yet. If she miscalculated, if she pushed too soon, the company wouldn't survive it. "Let's begin," she said, her voice calm. The meeting rolled on, standard updates, projections, performance forecasts, and then Ethan leaned forward. "I think we need to revisit the cybersecurity narrative," he said smoothly. "Our internal reports show minor anomalies, but the market is starting to pick up rumors. If we don't get ahead of it, it could look like we're hiding something." Charlotte didn't blink. "And how would you suggest we handle it?" "Transparency," Ethan replied, eyes locked on hers. "We release a statement, confirm that minor maintenance is happening, reassure shareholders. And in the meantime," he smiled, "we reevaluate the architecture of your back-end protocols, bring in outside experts, translation remove control from Charlotte, strip her oversight, invite external firms loyal to Ethan." Charlotte's jaw tightened. Before she could speak, another board member chimed in. "I agree with Ethan. The media's watching us closely. We can't afford speculation." She forced a nod. "Understood." Then she pivoted. I'll review the access logs and provide a report within 24 hours. Actually, Ethan said casually, I already took the liberty of running a sweep last night. Charlotte's blood went cold. He pulled out a small tablet and tapped the screen. A series of documents appeared on the large monitor behind them: logins, timestamps, access credentials. And then a name: Mulligan Jack. Position: night operations, janitorial staff. Access level flagged. Critical system. Breach pending investigation. The room went silent. Charlotte stared at the screen, then at Ethan. What is this? She asked. Ethan feigned concern. That's what I was hoping you could explain. A janitor who, as far as I can tell, was never cleared for any security permissions has been inside our server core. He's accessed high-level financial data, and based on some irregular packet transfers, he may be the source of our leak. Charlotte felt the room shift. Chairs creaked, eyes turned. Someone whispered, "Is this true?" She stood. Jack Mulligan is not a threat. He's the reason we caught the breach in the first place. According to him, Ethan said. No, she snapped. According to the evidence. Ethan kept his tone smooth. Charlotte, I understand this is personal. I read the timestamps. The two of you have been in close contact, off record, after hours. That opens us up to liability. There it was, the unspoken weapon. He wasn't just painting Jack as a threat. He was painting Charlotte as compromised. Charlotte's mind raced. She could try to reveal what Jack found, that Ethan was the real leak. But the masked second user was still unidentified. Without a full trail, Ethan could spin it back on her. If she played the card too early, the fallout would be nuclear. So she made the hardest choice a leader can make. She said nothing. I'll handle it internally, she said coolly. Thank you, Ethan. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The rest of the board nodded. They believed they'd witnessed a CEO regaining control, but Charlotte felt like she was burying a knife in her own back. Jack stood just outside the boardroom watching through the one-way glass. He hadn't intended to be there, but Charlotte had sent him a cryptic message hours earlier. If anything goes sideways, watch the room from the service corridor. So he did. And now he watched as every face turned on him, as his name flickered across the screen like a warning label, as Charlotte stood still taking hit after hit without flinching. He'd seen ambushes before, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in custody hearings. But this one hurt, because Charlotte didn't say his name, didn't defend him, didn't fight. He turned and walked away. That night back in his apartment, Jack didn't touch dinner. Ben sat at the table with his robot, quietly pretending not to notice the tension in his father's face. Bad day, Ben asked. Jack forced a smile. Something like that. You want to talk about it? No, Jack said. Then after a pause, but thanks. They sat in silence, the only sound the ticking clock above the stove. Ben reached across the table, placed his small hand on top of Jack's. I still think you're the best at fixing stuff. Jack swallowed hard. Thanks, buddy. At Aurelius, Charlotte stood alone in her office watching the city lights blur behind the rain. She poured herself a drink. Didn't sip it. Instead, she pulled up the security terminal. Input a single command. Opened Jack's shadow system. And left him a note tucked into the back end of the decoy server. You were right. But I can't protect you unless I know for sure. Stay in the shadows a little longer. Watch everything. And when the time comes, we finish this together. The halls of Aurelius Tower were silent at 3:17 a.m., the kind of silence that doesn't belong to peace, but to calculation. Somewhere deep inside its concrete heart, the trap had already been laid. It was Jack's idea, but it took Charlotte's resolve to make it real. 2 nights ago, he was ready to walk away, burned, betrayed, painted as the villain in a room full of men with polished shoes and sharpened smiles. But then she sent the message. A line of code buried in the digital ruins of their trust. Stay in the shadows. Watch everything. We finish this together. And he did. He stayed. Jack sat alone in the lower server annex, a room cold enough to numb his fingertips, facing 3 dark monitors and a single screen glowing with fake temptation. The decoy file looked like gold unreleased merger terms, untraceable fund flows, a staged vulnerability in Aurelius's financial structure. Fabricated, but with enough breadcrumbs to be irresistible. You think they'll take the bait. Charlotte's voice came through the comms, calm, quiet. They will, Jack replied. They're greedy. Greedy people get sloppy. Charlotte didn't respond, but he heard her breathing steady on the other end. She was upstairs watching from her private terminal. Alone, as always. You know, Jack said after a moment, for someone who built a tower out of glass, you sure hide well. Charlotte chuckled faintly. Glass reflects. That's not the same as revealing. Silence again. Then Jack whispered, You ready for this? No, she said honestly, but I'm tired of being afraid of my own company. Hours earlier, they had rehearsed the plan in the shadows of her office, no lights, no cameras. Charlotte had sealed the internal audit files behind the same mirror firewall Jack had used to set his first trap. Then she scheduled her board access token, her most sensitive login, to make a ghost appearance in the decoy system at precisely 3:20 a.m. A digital whisper to lure the real traitor in. It'll look like you're trying to hide something, Jack had warned. I am, Charlotte replied. A snare. Now in the cold quiet below, Jack watched the logs tick forward. 3:19:44, 3:19:53, 3:20:01. The trap activated. At first nothing, then movement. A ping, small, precise, an internal login. EthanColeAurelius.com. Jack muttered. Came early. Of course you did. But then another flash. Admin Phoenix Charlotte sat up straighter upstairs. Who the hell is that? Jack's eyes narrowed. Not an alias I recognize, Charlotte typed furiously. It's an old credential. Used once years ago. Buried. Never deleted. But it was mine. Jack's voice darkened. They're using your ghost accounts. That's how they've stayed invisible. Then the data began to drain. The decoy files opened, copied, funneled into an external channel masked as a routine vendor sync. Jack whispered, They took it. A pause. Then his screen blinked red. A second device joined the siphon. Not Ethan's. Someone else. Damn it, Jack breathed. There's another one. Upstairs, Charlotte watched the chaos bloom like a flower of fire. This isn't just Ethan, she said, her voice low. Someone else is backing him. Or controlling him, Jack said. Ethan's the front. The smiling face. But this other account, Phoenix, that's deep root. They have architecture-level access. Charlotte stood slowly, the early light of dawn bleeding in behind her like the opening of a wound. Time to cut off their hands, she said. 30 minutes later, Charlotte walked into her private control room. No press, no board members. Just her Jack and 2 mirrored terminals. Jack brought the evidence forward, logs, IP trails, account timestamps, all irrefutable. The second user, the masked ghost in the machine, was using her own abandoned credentials to tunnel into the system. You were the perfect shield, Jack said. They didn't even need to frame you. You gave them the keys 5 years ago and forgot to change the locks. Charlotte looked at the blinking line that represented the Phoenix account and whispered, Not anymore. She typed a single command. Kill, process, Phoenix. The signal severed. The connection died, but the damage had already been done. Jack frowned. They got out with the bait. Now they think it's real. Charlotte looked at him. Good. Let them move. Let them think they've won. He raised an eyebrow. You want to keep playing? No, she said. I want to end it. But on the stage, they chose. At dawn, Charlotte stepped into the penthouse-level press lounge of Aurelius for the first time in months. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, making her feel oddly exposed. Below, the city churned. Reporters, investors, staff, all waiting for her next move. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Instead, she turned toward Jack, who was already preparing the final part of the plan. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. Jack nodded. "You lit the fire. I'll pull the curtain." She gave him a small, tight smile. "Then let's bring the ghosts into the light." By 6 a.m., every system across Aurelius was humming at full capacity. Charlotte's digital team, under strict orders, pushed a system maintenance update company-wide, masking the final phase of the operation. Meanwhile, Jack uploaded the entire trail, the siphon logs, the backdoor accounts, the Phoenix Ghost sessions to a secure read-only server, one accessible by the board, and unbeknownst to them, by every internal team lead at Aurelius. Charlotte scheduled an emergency executive briefing for 9:00 a.m. sharp. The bait was no longer code. The bait was truth. At 7:42 a.m., back in Jack's apartment, Ben stirred on the couch. Jack leaned down, brushing a hand across his son's head. "Got a meeting, bud," he whispered. Ben blinked up. "Is this the big one?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, might be the last one for a while." Ben yawned. "Don't let the bad guys win." Jack smiled. "I won't." By the time the sun was fully risen, the Aurelius Tower was alive with quiet tension. Charlotte stood at the edge of the conference room waiting for the final hour to strike. Jack waited in the shadows behind a mirrored partition, a silent guardian. And across the room, Ethan Cole entered, confident as ever. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiled, completely unaware that his digital fingerprints were already printed across every wall of the building. It started with a whisper. A single line of code. Misplaced, misunderstood, weaponized. By the time the sun reached its full height over Chicago, the narrative had already shifted. Jack Mulligan wasn't the man who saved Aurelius. He was the man who tried to burn it down. The trap had worked. The decoy files had been accessed. The siphon traced. The ghost account exposed. Every digital thread tied neatly to Ethan Cole and the mysterious admin Phoenix login. Charlotte had the logs. Jack had the receipts. The morning briefing was set to drop a bomb on the boardroom floor. But just before 8:30 a.m., everything changed. The system shuddered. Not physically, but beneath the surface, something moved. Jack caught it on his terminal, a log injection, sudden and elegant. A rewrite of the event sequence from the night before. Dozens of access points previously flagged under Ethan Cole were replaced one by one with his name. Mulligan.Jack, unauthorized entry. Mulligan.Jack, server override. Mulligan.Jack, attempted data theft. It wasn't just a forgery, it was perfect. He called Charlotte immediately. No answer. Then another call. This time, security. Mr. Mulligan, came a voice, tight and professional. You've been requested to remain on the premises for questioning regarding unauthorized activity in Aurelius systems. I didn't. Jack started, then stopped. The futility hit like a punch to the gut. They had flipped the script, and it wasn't sloppy. It was surgical. Charlotte stormed into the boardroom 5 minutes before the briefing. Her expression was calm, but her blood ran cold. Ethan was already there, sitting in her seat. "Charlotte," he said, rising. "Glad you made it. You'll want to be here for this." She didn't respond, just sat across from him, her eyes unreadable. "Before we begin," Ethan said, turning to the board, "I'd like to address something serious. We've confirmed a breach in our security, deep sustained and internal. After a full audit, we've identified the source." The screen behind him blinked to life. Lines of data filled the room. His name is Jack Mulligan, night custodian. No formal clearance. Somehow he accessed core systems, manipulated logs, and attempted to frame key personnel, myself included. He paused, pretending to look pained. I trusted him. Some of us, his eyes flicked to Charlotte, trusted him deeply. But the evidence is clear. Charlotte's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Downstairs, Jack was escorted through the lobby by 2 guards. No handcuffs, just shame. He didn't fight, he didn't raise his voice, But inside, something old and bitter clawed at his chest, the same feeling he'd had 3 years ago when his world collapsed the first time. He knew how quickly people erased you. All it took was the right lie. By noon, the headlines were already drafted. Janitor hacker at Aurelius Internal Breach Rocks 10B merger deal, who is Jack Mulligan? From security consultant to suspect. Jack watched the news roll in from the edge of the company's security holding room. No windows, no sound but the ticking of a small analog clock. His thoughts drifted not to the trap, not to the breach, but to Ben. What would he tell his son? What words do you give a child when your name becomes poison? Meanwhile, in the quiet of her glass-walled office, Charlotte stared at the real logs Jack's backups buried in an isolated offline server they had both used during the operation. The truth was there, still intact, still pure. But she also saw how the forged version outmaneuvered it, slightly cleaner, more linear, more believable. It didn't matter what was real. It only mattered what people saw first. At 2:15 p.m., Charlotte stood outside the holding room door. She hesitated. This was her fault. She had brought him in. She had watched him be destroyed. She opened the door. Jack looked up. "You're here to finish it." Charlotte stepped inside and shut the door quietly behind her. "I know you didn't do it," she said. Jack's expression didn't change. "That doesn't help much now, does it?" She sat across from him. "They forged everything. I found the original logs, the deep backups. It's all there." He gave a short, hollow laugh. "You realize that means nothing, right? The first version always wins. Truth plays catch-up." Charlotte swallowed. "I'm going to fix this." Jack looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "You're going to protect the company. That's what you always do." She didn't deny it, because it was true. By sunset, Jack was released quietly, no press, no charges, no apology. Just a signed NDA and a polite escort out the back of the building. Charlotte watched from her office window as he walked across the lot. No fanfare, no words. Just a man disappearing again. Back at the apartment, Jack unlocked the door with a sigh that lived in his bones. Ben was waiting, backpack on the floor, robot in hand. "Hey, Dad," he said gently. "Did you lose your job again?" Jack knelt down, exhaustion radiating from every line in his face. "Yeah," he whispered. "I did." Ben's lip trembled, but he nodded. "Okay. Can we still go to the science fair?" Jack pulled him into a hug. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Later that night, after Ben had fallen asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank notebook. In his mind, he rewrote every moment of the past week, every decision, every risk, every sacrifice. He had wanted to stay invisible. Now he was more invisible than ever. Back at Aurelius, Charlotte walked into the darkened server room. The monitors were off. The trap had sprung. The enemy had retaliated. And Jack, the one man who had saved her empire, was gone. She placed a small flash drive on the table. Inside were the true logs, the unedited ones. She whispered into the silence, "I'm not done. Not yet." Across the city, Jack sat alone in the dark, a single lamp flickering overhead, his hand resting on the robot Ben had built. And though the world had turned on him once again, something inside him refused to go out. A spark, a stubborn flicker of light. Because he knew the truth, and truth, like a good firewall, only needs one entry point to break through. The city rose to life beneath a steel-gray sky, the wind off Lake Michigan sharp and impatient. On the 40th floor of the Aurelius Tower, a storm brewed with no clouds in sight. Today was the day. The $10 billion merger between Aurelius Holdings and Ionex Financial would be announced before the press, the market, and the world. All eyes were on Charlotte Vance, and somewhere in the shadows of the building she built the truth waited to erupt. Charlotte stood in the executive dressing suite staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her navy dress suit was flawless. Her hair was pinned with precision. Not a wrinkle, not a tremble. but inside her pulse was a drumbeat of doubt. The plan had to be perfect. Timing exact. One misstep and it wouldn't just be the merger that crumbled, it would be her. Jack's flash drive sat inside the lining of her jacket. Unseen. Unopened. Ready. Downstairs, the press flooded the lobby like rising tidewater. Lights, cameras, journalists in sleek suits and tired eyes. The chatter was deafening. Charlotte's team moved like clockwork, handing out statements, rehearsing the talking points, shielding her from questions, especially about Jack Mulligan. The public story was clear: a rogue janitor accessed the system, internal review underway, business as usual. But behind the curtain, the truth waited, surgical quiet, deadly. Jack had given her everything. The logs, the timestamps, the proof. He had sacrificed his name, his safety, his dignity, and she had done nothing. Until now. Back in the apartment, Jack sat on the edge of the couch, dressed in jeans and a black collared shirt. Ben stood in front of him, adjusting the tiny bow tie on his school uniform. "You look sharp." Jack smiled. Ben grinned. "My robot's in the display window. Ms. Carter says I might win Best Design." "You will," Jack said, "because it's yours." Ben nodded. "You comin'?" Jack hesitated. Then, "Yeah, Bud. I'll be there." But not yet. He grabbed his worn messenger bag and tucked in the backup drive. A second copy, just in case. It was time. At 10:00 a.m., the Aurelius Grand Hall was packed. Board members, legal teams, analysts, every chair filled, every screen ready. Charlotte entered the room with her usual elegance, face unreadable, every step deliberate. Ethan Cole stood beside the podium, the picture of confidence. He wore power like cologne, thick, invisible, unmistakable. He leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll do the heavy lifting." Charlotte offered a faint smile. "That's what you're good at, isn't it?" He didn't hear the blade behind the words. Backstage, hidden from view, Jack slipped into the auxiliary AV booth thanks to an old favor, an old friend still working building security. No ID, no clearance, just shadows. He synced his tablet to the backup feed. He had one job now: make sure Charlotte wasn't alone. If she stepped forward, if she chose the truth, he would be ready. If not, he would press the button himself. The lights dimmed. The Aurelius logo swirled on screen. Ethan stepped forward, smooth as ever. "Good morning. Today marks a new era for innovation, transparency, and global leadership." Applause. Cameras flashed. He smiled like a man on top of the world. And now he said, gesturing, "Please welcome the woman who made this all possible, Charlotte Vance." The room rose. Charlotte stepped up to the podium. She paused, just for a second. Enough for those watching closely to see the flicker of hesitation. Then she spoke. "Thank you," she began. Her voice clear, grounded. "This morning we were prepared to announce one of the largest mergers in fintech history." People leaned in. But last night, she continued, something unexpected happened. Whispers. Jack sat forward in his chair backstage, eyes narrowing. Charlotte reached into her jacket and pulled out the drive. "I discovered new information," she said. "Information that changes everything." Ethan's smile faltered. His eyes sharpened. "I was wrong," Charlotte said, "about who to trust, about what's been happening behind the scenes. And today, before I sign anything, I want to show you the truth." She turned to the screen and nodded once. The feed changed. Jack triggered the upload. The room exploded in gasps. File trails, IP logs, admin accounts, every siphoned byte of stolen data displayed in full, mapped and timed. And at the center of it all, Ethan Cole. "Impossible," he muttered. "This is fake." Charlotte faced him. "This is the unaltered log history from our offline backup servers. You weren't just leaking data, Ethan. You were building a takeover using the merger to gut Aurelius and hand it to our competitors." The board members sat stunned. One stood. "Is this confirmed?" Jack's voice rang from the booth, fed through the sound system. "It's confirmed. Every packet, every transfer. I tracked them myself. Gasps again. Charlotte didn't flinch. He's the man you all tried to silence, she said. The one you framed. Ethan stepped forward, face flush, voice rising. She's protecting a criminal. He hacked our system. No, Charlotte snapped. He protected it, while you sold it off one piece at a time. Security entered the room. Ethan looked around. For allies. For exits. Found none. You can't do this, he growled. You don't have proof. I don't need to, Charlotte said. The network does. Ethan lunged forward but was stopped. Handcuffs clicked shut. An hour later, the press conference resumed. The merger was officially suspended. Aurelius' stock wavered but didn't fall, because the world had seen something it rarely witnessed in corporate America: accountability. Charlotte stood once more before the crowd. I built this company from nothing, she said. And I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. I allowed good people to be punished for doing the right thing. That ends today. And as she spoke, every employee watching from their desks, every investor, every partner saw it too. The beginning of something new. Backstage, Charlotte found Jack near the AV terminal alone, packing up his bag. He looked at her, unsure what to say. "You did it," she said. "No," Jack replied. "You did?" She smiled softly. "Still want to disappear?" Jack shrugged. "That depends. On what? On. Whether this place still needs someone who sees the ghosts." Charlotte stepped closer. "We do, but only if you get to go home for dinner every night." He paused, then smiled. Deal. The storm had passed. But the silence it left behind wasn't peace. It was weight. Still. Heavy. 2 days after the fallout, the buzz of Aurelius Tower returned, but it had changed. The hallways no longer hummed with whispered suspicion. The tension in the boardroom chairs had eased, and the whispers that once lingered behind Charlotte Vance's back had gone quiet. Ethan Cole was gone, facing legal proceedings for corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. His name stripped from the company's internal systems, his office emptied before the sun even rose the morning after the deal collapsed. But some shadows take longer to leave. Charlotte stood alone in her private conference room, hands clasped behind her back as she stared out the window. Below, Chicago moved on, oblivious to how close one company had come to imploding. There were a dozen calls she needed to return, shareholders to reassure, a crisis PR strategy to finalize. But all she could think about was the silence, not just in the office, inside her, the kind that arrives when you've spent your whole life outrunning disaster, then stop, look back, and realize you never outran it. You just carried it with you, and the one person who had stood beside her in the darkest hour, he wasn't here anymore. Jack Mulligan hadn't returned to Aurelius. No press, no applause, no reinstatement. When Charlotte offered him a new position, chief security architect, full clearance, full salary, he thanked her and said no. "I just want to go back to my kid," he'd said quietly. "I don't want a title. I want time." And she hadn't tried to change his mind, because somewhere deep down, Charlotte knew what that cost him the first time. At his small apartment on the west side, Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla curling into the air. Ben sat at the table, kicking his feet, half asleep, hugging his robot like a stuffed animal. Jack smiled. They had the windows open, a rare luxury in a city where most people hid behind glass and noise, but this morning the world felt a little softer, lighter. Ben looked up. "Did you fix everything?" Dad Jack paused, spatula in hand. "I think so," he said. "Most of it." Ben blinked. "Is the bad guy going to jail?" "Looks like it. And you don't have to go to that building anymore." Jack looked at him, really looked. "No, not unless I want to." Ben grinned, toothy and crooked. "Good. I like having you home." And that right there was the moment Jack realized what victory really looked like. Not a press release, not a handshake, but a quiet breakfast on a Tuesday morning with a kid who still believed in heroes. Back at Aurelius, Charlotte moved through the glass halls with her usual poise, but the staff noticed something different. She was softer around the edges, warmer, human. She asked questions now, about their lives, their kids, their hopes. When the CTO nervously suggested building an internal child care program for employees, Charlotte didn't shoot it down. She said, let's build a prototype, something small, personal. And when they did tucked in a corner room once used for storage, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Because all she could picture was Ben Mulligan sitting in that space tinkering with wires and gears while his dad worked just down the hall. One evening, as twilight painted the buildings gold, Charlotte stepped into the empty elevator and pressed the basement level. No assistants, no cameras, no schedule, just her. The server room was still running, of course, but Jack's bench, his little corner of cables and tools, remained untouched. She sat there for a moment, listening to the low hum of machines. It was the quietest she'd felt in years. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. Still owe you a drink. Or maybe pancakes. Your call. Then she hesitated and hit delete. Instead, she stood and walked out. That weekend, Charlotte did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She left the city. No driver, no security, just her, a coffee, and a GPS pin she'd saved weeks ago. She found herself in a neighborhood lined with cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences where kids played on curbs and neighbors shouted across porches like it was still the 80s. It smelled like real food, and something else. Life. She parked in front of a red brick apartment building with peeling paint and crooked numbers on the door. She was about to knock when it opened. Ben stood there barefoot, clutching a juice box. He blinked. You're the lady from the big TV. Charlotte froze. Yes, that's me. He tilted his head. You made my dad stay up all night. She smiled gently. I did. Want to come in? A pause. Then she stepped inside. The apartment was small, but it was warm. Lived in, comfortable. The scent of pancakes still lingered even in the late afternoon. Jack appeared from the kitchen in jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking as if he'd just stepped out of someone else's life. He stopped when he saw her. Charlotte. Jack. He dried his hands with a dish towel. Eyes never leaving hers. Wasn't expecting you. I wasn't sure I'd come. Ben piped up. She can stay for dinner. Right. Jack looked at his son, then at her, and something in his chest loosened. If she wants to, he said quietly. Charlotte smiled. I'd like that. That night, over simple food and laughter that came easier than expected, Charlotte Vance, CEO of Aurelius Woman of Glass Towers and billion-dollar deals, learned something she hadn't realized she'd forgotten. What it meant to be still, to be present, to be invited in. And as she helped wash the dishes, sleeves rolled hands in soap, she glanced over at Jack. He caught her eye. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because healing didn't come with declarations or press releases. Sometimes it just walks through a door and stays for dinner. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a space after the chaos ends. Not the eerie quiet of emptiness, nor the stillness of retreat, but the hush of peace. Earned peace. The kind that lingers like the last note of a beautiful song. It was late long, past the hour most buildings dimmed and locked, but in a small corner of the Aurelius Tower, a single light still glowed. Not the harsh blue of computer screens, not the artificial brightness of LED panels, but the warm, golden light of a standing lamp in Charlotte Vance's private office, soft, gentle, almost domestic. And there she sat barefoot on the couch, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands, watching the city lights blink like distant stars. The world outside spun forward, markets rising and falling, deals being brokered in glass towers across time zones. But tonight, she let it all drift. The door opened with a quiet click. Jack stepped inside, holding a small brown paper bag that crinkled as he walked. You left your dinner on the counter, he said. Again. Charlotte looked up and smiled, her features relaxed, softer than anyone at Aurelius would recognize from the press photos. I got distracted. Jack sat across from her, setting the bag between them. You're always distracted. But I figured you'd be hungry." She opened the bag and laughed. "Pancakes." He shrugged. "You said breakfast food was comfort food." "I said that one time. And I listen." She took a bite, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Just the quiet ticking of the old wall clock Charlotte had started using again when she'd pulled out of storage. Analog, real, slightly slow. She liked it that way. "Do you miss it?" Jack asked eventually. Charlotte looked over. "What?" "The chaos, the pressure, the need to be the smartest person in the room, every room." She thought for a long moment. "No," she said truthfully, "but I miss pretending it was the only thing that mattered." Jack nodded. "It's easier to hide inside work." "It was more than hiding," she said. "It was armor. Success made me bulletproof, or at least I thought it did." He leaned back. "Then one bullet got through." "Yeah," she whispered, "and his name was Jack Mulligan." Jack raised his hands in mock defense. "Hey, I just fixed the leak." Charlotte chuckled. "You rewired my life, Mulligan." The room fell into a comfortable silence. Outside the window, snow began to fall soft, slow, the kind that turns a city into a lullaby. Charlotte stood and walked to the window, arms crossed loosely. "You know, my father never believed in second chances," she said. "He thought people were either loyal or they weren't, either useful or gone." Jack joined her, his gaze following hers. "But I think he was wrong," she continued. "I think we're all a little broken, a little complicated. And sometimes, the people who show up when we're most lost aren't the ones we expect. They're just the ones who care." He looked at her gently. "You've changed." She smiled. "So have you." Weeks passed. Spring returned, and with it a slower rhythm to the lives that had once been chained to boardrooms and firewalls. Ben won first place at the city science fair. His robot stood proudly beside him, wobbling only a little. Jack didn't miss the moment. Not this time. He was front row, phone out, tears unapologetically in his eyes. Charlotte was there too, watching from a quiet corner. No press, no spotlight. Just a woman learning to celebrate things that couldn't be measured in dollars or data. One morning, Jack and Charlotte met for coffee in the park. No suits, no scripts, just two people who had walked through fire together and somehow come out better. Charlotte handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" Jack asked. "Open it." Inside was a simple key card. "It's for the new satellite office," she explained. "Smaller, simpler, community-based projects. You don't have to take the job, but I'd like to build something that feels different. Less armor, more heart." Jack studied the card. Still, after all that clean code. "No," she said. "This time I'm after clean starts." He smiled. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I think," she said quietly. "We both are." That night, the three of them, Jack, Charlotte, and Ben, sat around a modest dinner table in Jack's apartment. The lights were low. The laughter was real. Ben told stories about school robots and how Miss Carter played guitar during recess. Charlotte listened like it was symphony. Later, when Ben fell asleep on the couch with his head on her shoulder, Jack watched the two of them and said softly, "You know, there was a time I thought my story was over. That I'd already used up my one chance." Charlotte looked up, her eyes warm. "But maybe he continued some stories, just need a second act." She nodded. "And maybe," she whispered, "some of us weren't meant to walk alone." The last light in the apartment flicked off. Outside, the city exhaled beneath a sky full of stars. No headlines, no heroes, just lives quietly mending. And the promise of something more. Not perfect, but real. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from quiet mornings over pancakes, from a child's laughter echoing through an apartment hallway, from a key left on the table, and a second chance taken with trembling hands. Charlotte and Jack's story reminds us that redemption isn't just for the movies. It's for the broken-hearted, the tired, the ones who stayed silent when they should have spoken, and the ones who kept showing up even after the world turned its back. Because love, real love, isn't perfect. It's patient. It's present. And sometimes it arrives dressed in overalls fixing broken wires in the dark. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment of unexpected redemption? A quiet act of love that changed everything? If you have, share it in the comments. Whether it happened in an office, a kitchen, or the middle of nowhere, your story might be exactly what someone out there needs to hear today. And let us know, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel, and how they connect hearts across the globe. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming storytelling like this. We've got more journeys to take together, more lives to step into, and more reasons to believe in the power of kindness, courage, and love. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in second chances.